Good morning. You'll notice I'm not in my usual spot. I apologize for that. My other camera was acting up, so I had to use a different one. Anyway, this is the week 11 Viva. This week's Viva question is, what can we learn about living the good life by studying the lives of Socrates and Alcibiades? And I apologize for the flickering light. Today, many people think of the good life in very materialistic terms, like how much money you have, what kind of house you live in, basically your living status today. Many Americans take a utilitarian approach to education coupled with a materialistic view, but this can be potentially destructive. Instead of this, we should look at the example of Socrates and his understanding of education as a foundation for virtue, rather than a source of financial and political success. Our thesis is Socrates and Alcibiades represent dramatically different approaches to living the good life. Socrates pursued virtue via learning, while Alcibiades pursued pleasure and success. Their respective experiences offer us essential insights into what the good life is and how to live it. And the 3 points we're going to look at today are the lives they lived, the works they accomplished, and how they met their end. First off, we're going to look at the lives they lived, starting with their younger lives. Alcibiades was born in 451 BC to a politician father and an aristocratic mother. He was the nephew of Pericles and spent much of his early childhood in his uncle's home. He was also a friend and eventual pupil of Socrates. Alcibiades as a boy was a very interesting youth. We have many different stories, like how he would refuse to play the flute because he thought it made him look funny. I can tell you right now, the flute does not make you look funny. So he's obviously wrong, but in spite of this, he refuses to go to lessons, which influences all the other boys in his school to not go to lessons. And so the school has to cancel the lessons because nobody's going. Another experience was he bought a dog for about 70 minas, which is about $3,000 today, and then proceeded to cut off its tail, just so the Athenians would talk about what he had done to his dog. Socrates, on the other hand, was more of a middle-class citizen. He was the son of a stonemason and was probably trained as a stonemason himself, and popular belief is that he carved the statues of the three Graces that stood near the Acropolis. Socrates claimed to have learned rhetoric from Pericles' de facto spouse. Their appearances of the two men, their different appearances were very different. We're going to look at that and how it influenced the character. To quote Deborah Nails, quote, Socrates was profoundly ugly. He had wide-set, bulging eyes, a flat, upturned nose, and large, fleshy lips, unquote. Alcibiades, on the other hand, was reported as one of the most beautiful men in Athens and in the world at that time. And their unique experiences are going to influence their character, their lives, and their careers, which leads us into our second point, which is their careers, the works they accomplished. Both men served in the military. Socrates served as a hoplite, or common foot soldier, and while doing so, he actually saved Alcibiades' life. According to Plutarch, quote, when Alcibiades fell wounded, it was Socrates who stood over him and defended him, unquote. Alcibiades, unlike Socrates, used his good looks and influence with his father and mother to quickly rise in the ranks. He was appointed to the rank of general or strategos and retained that rank for 15 consecutive years. After Socrates was done serving, he became a philosopher, and after a couple years of this, he was told that he was the wisest man in Athens, and he tried to prove that wrong. He went around asking people questions and why they thought he was the wisest man and why was he the wisest man, and he figured out that people viewed him as the wisest man in Athens precisely because he was the only one who was willing to admit how dumb he was. All the other people would spout nonsense about what they thought they knew, but he was the only one who would admit that he did not know something, and so he was regarded as one of the wisest men. While Socrates is searching for why he's the wisest man, Alcibiades has decided that he is going to take over the world and transform it. He proposes that he begins with Sicily. So just before he leaves on this expedition to Sicily, there are some serious charges leveled against him in a conspiracy involving a bunch of Hermes-headed little doorpost things. Anyway, it's a pretty serious charge, and he flees to Sparta. And he goes to the Spartans and says, hey, I will sell you the Athenian battle plans. And so he sells them to the Spartans, and the Spartans are really happy. They promote him. He lives with them for a while, becomes pretty famous. But then something happens with the Spartans, which we'll get to later, and he bounces to Persia, then back to Athens, then back to Persia, and eventually gets killed doing that. Which leads us into our final point, facing the end. How did they die, and what does it tell us? As Socrates grew older, many of his students took part in politics. Their views tended to be very anti-democratic, which worried many of the influential leaders of the time. And they leveled charges of corrupting the youth against Socrates and condemned him to death by poison. They placed him under house arrest, and he had an opportunity to escape, but he instead chose to stay in his place. When he died by poison, his death was mourned. Plato, one of his disciples and pupils, says this, quote, "The tears came in floods, so that I covered my face and wept. For losing such a man as my friend, the best, wisest, and most upright man of any that I have ever known." Unquote. Alcibiades' last years were quite chaotic. So as we mentioned before, he went to Sparta, but the Spartan military leader left for about a year and then came back, and his wife was about 8 months pregnant, and he said, wait, that doesn't work out. And then when the kid was born, she named it Alcibiades in private. So they weren't too happy with him, so he fled, went to Persia, eventually left Persia, went back to Athens. They welcomed him back, served a bit there, then he retired. Then while in retirement, he advised against a battle that they still fought anyway, and then lost. And then he was blamed, and so he flees back to Persia, but while he's fleeing there, he is assassinated by a Spartan hit squad in his house. And instead of fighting him, they burned his house down and then shot him with arrows when he ran out. So what does this tell us? In conclusion, Socrates and Alcibiades shared much in common, but each pursued what he thought to be the good life. By looking at their lives, careers, and deaths, we can gain some perspective into what the good life is. Thank you.